It's the Acrisure Fan Advantage from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette here on the North Shore Drive podcast every Saturday. We preview the upcoming Steelers game with an expert on their upcoming opponent, and we've got the man himself, Bobby Trosset, who calls himself Bobby Baltimore. It's going to be a big breakdown. Steelers, Ravens, Sunday, 1 p.m. Get all the preview you need right here on the North Shore Drive podcast, brought to you by the Acrisure Fan Advantage. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello, welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can read the Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com, where all of our Pittsburgh sports information, all our Pittsburgh sports articles, all our content, you can find it there. But if you want to enjoy this show and all the shows that we produce, look up Post-Gazette Sports on your favorite podcasting platforms and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel for all of our daily content. Today's episode is brought to you by Acrisure and the Acrisure Fan Advantage. The Fan Advantage brings you exclusive answers to your burning questions all season long with Steelers insider Brian Batko. We do that episode on Fridays, and then every Saturday, tune in for our talk with an exclusive expert on the Steelers' upcoming opponent. This week, it's the Baltimore Ravens. We have the man himself, Bobby Trosset, here. He calls himself Bobby Baltimore. He does the Ravens Vault. He does a great job with the show, and we're happy to have him on here. Bobby, thanks for making time to come on the show.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, a rivalry renewed, right? You got to make time for this type of stuff, a little crossover. So looking forward to getting into it all with you, because while it's maybe not as, I don't know, juicy as it once was in the early 2000s and into the 2010s, it's still one of the most storied rivalries in all of sports. And I think you've probably heard that on both sides so far through media availability this week.
I agree. Like, I saw like both sides kind of hyping it up, and Roquan Smith talking about I'm not a Raven every year until I beat the Steelers, and Patrick Queen talking about I can't stand Mike Tomlin, and the Steelers saying their things about the Ravens. And I'm just like, guys, like I feel it, but like it's just not the same as when like Joey Porter fought Ray Lewis or was about to fight Ray Lewis on a bus, right?
No. And you know what? It's probably never going to be the same. And that's okay. It's a different generation. You know, it's hard to have history repeat itself when we're talking about, again, not just in football, but globally. Like this is one of the most storied, historical, competitive, the parity in this in the globe when it comes to sports. So I think that's okay. It's funny. I tweeted it out earlier today, and the responses are just pouring in. I'd love to get your insight on this as well, and maybe even your audiences. But I said, let's have an open and honest conversation. Okay. Is the Ravens-Steelers rivalry living on borrowed time, or do you still consider it as being one of the best in all of sport? To me, it's how that's defined. How do you define rivalry? Is it the personalities? Is it, the game within the game, the hard hitting, the physicality, or is it the parity? Like I mentioned, just how close this has been. I mean, look at the game notes. It's absurd. Yeah. 18 of the 30 regular season games between Baltimore and Pittsburgh since 2008, the year that Harbs was hired in Baltimore, the year after Tomlin was hired in Pittsburgh. 18 of the 30 have been decided by 3 or fewer points, and 24 have been one-score affairs. If that's how you define a rivalry, then perhaps it's still one of the best. But if it's the former, like I mentioned, the personalities, the physicality, the players, the Hall of Famers, then it's probably not what it once was in your eyes.
The sports books have bumped the spread in this game to the Ravens -4.5. And I look at that and I'm like, the last 4 times these teams met, it's been by a field goal or less for the last 2 straight years. And I'm just like, man, like it doesn't matter how good or bad one team or the other is. These teams throw down and they keep it close. The last time it wasn't a single possession game that decided, or the swing possession score that decided the game, was 2019 at the end of the season when the Ravens were on their way to the playoffs and the Steelers were playing their fourth string undrafted rookie Devlin Hodges. But I want to get to this point of it, because clearly it's still a rivalry. I think that it is still a rivalry. I think that it doesn't have the same big name personalities to it, because there isn't Ray Lewis on one side with Ed Reed and Terrell Suggs, and then you had James Harrison and guys, but there's still big stars on both sides. Lamar Jackson for the Ravens obviously is the face for the Ravens there, but they have a lot of talent on their side. On the Steelers side, they still have T.J. Watt. They got Minkah Fitzpatrick. Cam Hayward's not playing in this game, but he's been a long-standing member of this rivalry. But there's still both those sides. If you're you've been talking to the guys with the Ravens. You've seen what they've been saying here on media days. What is the Ravens' biggest focus for facing the Steelers right now? Like, what are they saying? Like, hey, we got to stop this most importantly.
Well, I'd say just overall, that defensively speaking, we know that this is probably going to be, like I mentioned, physical, hard hitting. Guys are going to be on their P's and Q's when it comes to tackling and whatnot. And I know that's been somewhat of an issue for Pittsburgh, having watched Mike Tomlin's press conference and having watched some of these games over the last couple of weeks. So to me, it's just establishing the dominance in the trenches, and I would say if there's been question marks over the first 4 weeks of the season, Chris, it's that, with no Ronnie Stanley protecting Lamar's blind side, and with Patrick McCary, an undrafted rookie, having subbed in pretty admirably over the last couple of weeks, to me, it's like when you look at the game wrecker that TJ Watt can be, for the defensive front in Pittsburgh, and you already mentioned his running mates, some of the other guys that are out there. I know they're not going to have to deal with Hayward, which is a huge sigh of relief, I think, for Baltimore. But to me, it starts and ends with in the trenches. And how are you protecting Lamar Jackson? We know that he's at his best when he's able to improv. But if the protection's not there, then you're going to see him become, one-dimensional in a sense. And who wants to see that? I mean, what Todd Monken has done so far through the first month of the season has been nothing short of, it hasn't been perfect, but it has been a step in the right direction. And you've seen Lamar, from an accuracy standpoint, from a completion percentage standpoint, just take that step. And that allows you to essentially, it's a pick your poison kind of offense when everybody's healthy. And with that being said, they haven't had Odell Beckham Jr. and Rashad Bateman the last couple of weeks. Both of those guys are trending towards potentially playing this upcoming weekend. So to me, it starts in the trenches. It starts with protecting Lamar and allowing him to essentially show how diversified this offense can be. And we haven't been able to say that in a long time in Baltimore.
Listen, the trenches is what the Steelers have been talking about all week. They, Mike Tomlin came out on Tuesday and said, hey, we're adding a padded practice. We recognize that we have not been playing Steelers football as far as being physical. Najee Harris even saying that they were playing soft in their last game against the Texans, and they look to change that tone because they know they cannot play that way against the Ravens. And that's something that Mike Tomlin's talked about for years. He's like, when the Steelers were on their tear of winning over the Ravens for some time, he was like, listen, the Ravens are who keep us in check. They remind us of who we need to be because they build their team similar to how we build ours, and we build our team similar to how they build theirs. There's those, I think they have very similar philosophies, especially coaching philosophies, between Harbaugh and Tomlin, both who've won a Super Bowl, both who've been regular powers in the AFC North and in the AFC. And I think they've been both longstanding coaches. Like you said, Tomlin hired in 07, Harbaugh hired in 08. And they've been moving forward with that, and they've been two of the more respected coaches in the NFL. I think there's a lot of similarities there. I want to get more into the Lamar Jackson aspect of this on the other side of this upcoming break here, Bobby, because I think there's some really interesting aspects that the Ravens might be unlocking with Lamar that could be different than what's been with him with the Steelers, and I want to get your perspective on that. We'll do that in a minute here on the North Shore Drive podcast. It's the Acrisure Fan Advantage from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Just a reminder, all season long with the Acrisure Fan Advantage, we're bringing you closer to the Steelers than ever before, Steelers fans. All you have to do is, if you want to get your question on the show, go to acrisure.com/Fan Advantage, and you can submit your questions for Brian Batko, one of our Steelers insiders, to answer every single Friday when we're talking about this. We'll also do some special fan mailbag shows, especially during the bye week coming up. If you want to get your questions on there, go to acrisure.com/Fan Advantage. Also, we do this Saturday show every single week, breaking things down with an expert on the Steelers opponent that week. This week, it's Bobby Baltimore. We got a lot more coming up here on this discussion. Some Lamar Jackson talk and what the Steelers have to do to contain him and his new offense on the other side of this break of the North Shore Drive podcast, brought to you by the Acrisure Fan Advantage. Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast, it's the Acrisure Fan Advantage. We're talking with Bobby Trosset, a.k.a. Bobby Baltimore. Bobby, Lamar Jackson, I believe he had 4 touchdowns last week. He went off on the Cleveland Browns, a defense that had been terrorizing a lot of teams out there in the NFL to start the season. What's been different for Lamar in this new offense with the new offensive coordinator?
Like I mentioned, how diversified it is. He has more talent and playmaking ability at his disposal than he's ever had before throughout his 5 years, now 6th year in the NFL. And a lot of that has to do with the front office and the way that they just went ahead and invested in specific positions, most notably the wide receiver position, both in free agency and through the draft. And so to me, it starts and ends there. Then you bring in Todd Monken, right? A decorated offensive coordinator, maybe not necessarily at the NFL level, but with NFL experience from Georgia, coming off the back-to-back national championships. And he's tasked with essentially taking this offense to the next level, taking Lamar Jackson to the next level as a passer. And Lamar has done exactly that through the first month. Like I mentioned, great numbers in the completion percentage categories. The same with just overall accuracy. The deep ball with Zay Flowers has been working well. Again, it has not been perfect. It's always going to be imperfect in the NFL. But Lamar, to me right now, is showing that he's not just capable of beating you and gashing you with his legs. And a lot of us in Baltimore have watched him for all 5 years, right? And closely. And we believe that he could beat you with his arm going into this season. But a lot of folks outside of Baltimore, whether it's the national media, whatever, did not feel that that was the case. I think he's shown you so far through the early going in 2023 that not only as somebody with more autonomy and creative freedom can win games under Todd Monken, but they can do so. It just looks a little bit different, right? It's nothing crazy. It's not rocket science. Matter of fact, they've actually held on to a lot of the same concepts that former offensive coordinator Greg Roman installed from a run category standpoint, right? Some power run concepts, designed runs for Lamar. You saw a couple of those last week. You just alluded to that with his touchdowns. He had 2 on the ground, 2 through the air. So again, I think we're trending towards a direction in which it really will be a pick your poison kind of offense. But they're not healthy yet. They're not fully healthy. They're heading that way. It looks like Rashad Bateman's going to be able to go for the first time in a couple of weeks, and perhaps OBJ is the same. But that's the main difference, right? They no longer they finally scare you with their outside playmakers, and that has not been. I mean, Mark Andrews was lining up in the playoff game outside last year in the wild card round. That can't happen. That just can't happen. So they've taken the steps. They've invested in the talent around him, and so far it's paying early dividends.
I hear you on that. The investments, they look real. I love Zay Flowers. I cover Pitt football, so I've covered the ACC, and man, I've seen Zay Flowers work in college, and I like what I'm seeing so far in the NFL. Now,
hey, Chris, let me sorry to interrupt you real quick, but just Jeff Zrebiec, the Athletic for Baltimore here, just so that we're up to date and fresh. 4 Ravens not practicing on Friday. Ronnie Stanley. Morgan Moses, Adafe Owe, and Daryl Worley. Now, the guys that you care about, Steelers fans will care about, is like I mentioned, Ronnie Stanley's in 2019, he was their all-pro left tackle, right? And then he went down, and it's been just a horrific few years for him. I feel terrible for him. He just has not been able to get himself right. Now he's dealing with a knee. It was the ankle a couple of years ago that really was just catastrophic. He is Lamar's blindside protector. Him not practicing on Friday is probably not a great sign going into the weekend. Morgan Moses, I'm not ready to rule him out because he was a full participant, if I'm not mistaken, on Thursday, and he's one of the most durable offensive linemen. I don't think he's missed a start since his rookie year, so he might just be trying to get himself right. But now let me see here. Another tweet just came out on Ronnie. Sorry to go on a tangent here. I just want to make sure you have the freshest information.
Keep going.
Ronnie was missing at practice today, though it was likely a vet day. He was optimistic yesterday about playing Sunday from Jonas Schaefer, the Baltimore Banner. He just reminded me that Ronnie did meet with reporters. He not at the podium, but at the locker room on Thursday, and said that there was a strong possibility that he would be out there. So perhaps he and Morgan are just getting themselves right. But I just wanted to let you know that just came out moments ago.
Oh, that is huge. Ronnie Stanley, he'd be going up against Alex Highsmith on Jackson's blind side. TJ Watt, he'd be going up against Morgan Moses if both of them healthy. But the Steelers just last week, they faced two backup offensive tackles and did not do too well because the Texans schemed them out. And I think that's going to be something very interesting. Can the Ravens conduct a similar plan where they try to say, hey, we're going to force you to win with your interior defensive linemen and your linebackers to cover in space, to contain Lamar Jackson, but we are not letting those two guys, Highsmith and Watt, who literally scored 2 touchdowns in the same game to help them beat the Browns a few weeks ago, they're not going to let them win. And to Lamar Jackson's credit, and one thing I think people don't realize is that the Steelers have a ton of respect for Lamar Jackson. Even though he hasn't beaten them since 2019, they like Mike Tomlin. There has always been, like, I've always known Mike Tomlin wanted Lamar Jackson. Like, as much as people want to hide about that, they weren't going to pick him in the first round that year, but he was hoping Lamar Jackson would slip. That's something that I've always personally known, just from his reaction from seeing Lamar Jackson go to the Ravens. But the Steelers have a ton of respect for what he can do. I have a ton of respect for what he can do. And like you said, it's completing 74+% of his passes right now. He's finding himself. I think when that gets going, he becomes very dangerous. But historically, the Steelers, they've been able to contain him. Even in the 2019 win that Lamar Jackson got over the Steelers when they had Mason Rudolph, he got knocked out and Devin Hodges came in. He threw 3 interceptions in that game, but the Ravens defense was able to force that late turnover on Juju Smith-Schuster and got them the win. And crazily enough, in all his time in the NFL, he's only played the Steelers 2 more times. That's crazy to think with the history of this rivalry. One was the 2020 game in Baltimore where Minkah Fitzpatrick broke up the pass at the end. The other was the 2-point conversion failure game in Pittsburgh in 2021, but that's it. Every other year, he's only played the Steelers once a year in the past 3 of the past 4 seasons. That's crazy to think when you think about the history of this rivalry.
Yeah, well, it speaks to the rivalry, right? That Lamar has not played well against Pittsburgh. That to me speaks to what still is the case between these two foes. So the guy's thrown more interceptions than touchdowns. It is wild to think that it's only been 3 games. A lot of that's due to unavailability, right? Whether it's injuries or COVID, I think was also a game as well back a couple years ago. So look, you think you want to say that Pittsburgh's got a lot of respect for Lamar. I think that those of us who are, I always say this, those of us who are level-headed out here in Baltimore, right, and actually can look at this with a, I'd say a realistic approach, we all realize that Pittsburgh has played Lamar very tough, and we have respect for what the Steelers have game planned, and they have the athletes to go up against Lamar. Let's see if that's the case this upcoming weekend. But Lamar has been unpolished against the Steelers. And I know in hearing from him this week, he wants to absolutely buck that trend.
We'll see if he will. We'll talk about our predictions right on the other side of this break of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Acrisure Fan Advantage. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Acrisure Fan Advantage. I'm Chris Carter, your host here with Bobby Trosset, a.k.a. Bobby Baltimore, covering the Ravens. All right, Bobby, give it to me straight. If the Ravens are going to win this game, what do they have to do? What's the most important thing they have to do in this game? And give me your final score prediction.
Yeah, so I think they're going to split the season series. Let me just say that first and foremost. The Ravens right now are on a tear. They understand that they can go 3-0 in the division, all of which will be road wins if they can take care of Pittsburgh coming up on Sunday.
Huge.
Then they head to London. So to me, I'm going with the Ravens this time around. I'm going to go the Steelers later on in the year, which should be, who knows, potentially for all the marbles later on in the season. You never know. I think everybody's down on the AFC North right now. Please, this is still going to be, it's a week-to-week league. This is still going to be one of the toughest divisions in all of football, if you ask me. And I would not be surprised if the division itself is decided in week 17 or 18. I'm going to go Ravens 28-20, away from the whole 3-point thing that we mentioned earlier on, right? To me, it starts and ends with, and in chatting with Brooke Pryor from the beat of ESPN earlier this week for our preview on the Vault, she gave me some good insight in terms of what's gone wrong, some of the flaws in Kenny Pickett's game. And it's not all his fault. I know it's not exactly been great protection. He's dealing with what I know is a huge hot topic right now in Matt Canada and some of the deficiencies at offensive coordinator in terms of how vanilla or predictable the offense is right now. It sure looks like there isn't going to be a change made. I know a lot of folks this time last year were feeling like that would be the case for Greg Roman, but they had to wait until the season was over. Maybe that's the same for the Pittsburgh faithful. But here's why I'm going with the Ravens. I think that, first of all, obviously it's going to be hard-hitting. It's going to be physical. It's going to be close. But I heard and I've watched a little bit about how Kenny Pickett is very uncomfortable right now. He doesn't have a great command of the offense. And while, hey, let's be honest, Baltimore's pass rush unit over the years, right, since Terrell Suggs left, since C.J. Mosley departed, right, it's been pretty underwhelming. It's not exactly been those big names. However, and even with Odafe Owe and David Ojabo being down, like I mentioned, Owe didn't practice on Friday. Ojabo's down for at least 4 weeks on IR. I still think that they're getting high value and efficiency from two guys on the other side of 30, Chris. That's Jadeveon Clowney, who everybody knows in the division at this point. He's hopping around every year, it seems. And then Kyle Van Noy, who was their recent pickup. Much like they asked of JPP, Jason Pierre-Paul, a year ago, Kyle Van Noy was signed. Days later, the guy's logging significant amount of snaps and doing so productively. So I think not just from those two guys, but the interior of the defensive line and perhaps even some different blitz packages for DBs that Mike McDonald has cooked up, Ravens defensive coordinator, is going to take Kenny not out of this. I don't want to say out of this game physically, but I think it's going to take him out of his comfort zone, and that's going to give the Ravens an advantage there. Again, I think this is going to be a low-scoring one. I know what's the over/under set at, like 38 or something. So I know I'm hammering the over in terms of my prediction, but that's what I think is going to play out on Sunday in Pittsburgh.
I kind of feel you in this. The Ravens are allowing the fewest yards per passing attempt. They're allowing the 7th fewest yards per rushing attempt. I think the Steelers do find a way to establish that level of physicality that they want in this game. They will not be soft. They'll come out and play with the edge Najee Harris is talking about. But I'm with you. I'm picking the Ravens to win 23-17. I also think I'm a little outside of that spread this time. I think it's going to come down to a final possession where the Ravens get a stop when they can get Kenny Pickett in a predictable situation. But I do think this is a week where the Steelers can kind of go into the bye week, say, okay, we've started to find that identity again. Let's get healthy on the other side of the bye and carry forward. And then it'll be a very interesting rematch in Baltimore later this season. He's Bobby Trosset, a.k.a. Bobby Baltimore. Bobby, let people know you can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, well, thanks again for having me on, man. I appreciate it. Sarah Ellison and I, who we've both worked for the team in some capacity, she was much longer than I was. She was with the Ravens for over a decade in the media department, and I was with the Ravens radio stations doing pre- and post-game shows for 3 or 4 years. So we decided to partner up and do a daily show about a year and a half ago. Really, really just enjoying it. You know, we try to be as unbiased and level-headed, like I mentioned, as possible and consistent. We have a great partnership with Roquan Smith. Every Monday, the day after games, he comes on with us for about 20 minutes to talk about everything that unfolded the day prior. So if you haven't already checked us out, we're The Vault, a podcast covering the Baltimore Ravens, which can be found across all podcasting platforms, including YouTube. And as you see there on screen, I do have a separate channel as well, which is Baltimore Sports and Beyond. You can find that on YouTube at Bobby Baltimore. So I appreciate it again, man. Enjoy the game, and hope to link up in person at some point down the road.
Same here, Bobby. Thanks again for coming on the show, and thank you all for tuning into the show. This is the North Shore Drive podcast. It's been the Acrisure Fan Advantage. Thanks again for tuning in. Find us on the same way you find Bobby, all your podcasting platforms, and on YouTube. Just search Post-Gazette Sports. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We'll be with Ray Fittipaldo the evening after the game, so stay tuned right here for all our post-game reactions here from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For 3 months of digital access to post-gazette.com at 99 cents, click the link below in the description.